I always thought the thrill of exploring untouched wilderness was something reserved for the most daring and curious. The idea of wandering deep into ancient forests, far from the hum of civilization, promised a kind of raw, unfiltered connection to nature. It was a challenge I wanted to embrace, a chance to test my own limits against the unknown. So, when I first heard about the Whispering Woods, a remote woodland known among locals for its towering old-growth trees and thick underbrush, I felt an irresistible pull to see it for myself. The journey began on a late afternoon, with the sun dipping low and casting long, golden shadows through the canopy. The trail was narrow and winding, bordered by moss-covered roots and fallen leaves that muffled my every step. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, a perfume that seemed to anchor me in the moment. As I moved deeper, the forest grew denser, the trees older and more massive than any I'd encountered before. Their twisted branches reached high, intertwining like ancient hands locked in silent prayer. The light filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground in shifting patterns that danced with the gentle breeze. At first, the experience was everything I had hoped for, peaceful, invigorating, and filled with a quiet sense of solitude. The only sounds were the occasional calls of distant birds and the rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth. But as the minutes passed, a subtle change began to creep into the atmosphere. The forest seemed to lean inward, pressing closer as if it were alive and aware. The usual woodland noises faded, replaced by something far less natural. At first, I barely noticed. A faint rustling here, a whisper of movement there. I told myself it was just the wind or the harmless scurry of animals. But then the sounds grew more deliberate, more rhythmic, like hushed voices carried on the breeze, too soft to understand but unmistakably human. They seemed to come from all directions, weaving through the trees in a way that defied logic. I stopped walking, straining my ears to catch the murmurs, but they slipped away each time I focused on them, as if the forest itself was playing tricks. Unease settled in my chest, a cold knot of apprehension that tightened with every step. The shadows lengthened, darkening the underbrush until the bright afternoon light was barely a memory. I glanced around, trying to spot the source of the whispers, but the woods offered no answers, only a dense wall of trunks and leaves, shifting gently as if alive. The silence returned in sudden, sharp bursts, broken only by the occasional crack of a twig or the snap of a distant branch. I reached a small clearing just as the sun was slipping below the horizon, the last rays painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges. Here, the trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled roots twisting into the earth around a shallow, mossy hollow. The quiet was profound, almost oppressive. I set down my pack and took a moment to breathe, trying to shake the creeping feeling that I was being watched. Then I saw it, a cluster of broken branches arranged unnaturally near the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it might be the work of forest animals, but the pattern was too deliberate, too precise. It resembled a crude symbol or warning, formed by a series of interlocking sticks and leaves. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, as if I had stumbled onto something meant to be hidden. I knelt down, examining the arrangement more closely, but the deeper I looked, the more I realized this forest held secrets far beyond its serene facade. As twilight deepened, the whispers returned, no longer distant but unmistakably close. They seemed to circle around me, threading through the trees with a haunting cadence that echoed in the hollow. My heart pounded as shadows began to shift unnaturally at the edges of the clearing. Shapes flickered just beyond my vision, too quick to focus on, but too deliberate to ignore. Each sound, each movement felt like a message, a warning woven into the fabric of the night. I tried to rationalize it as my imagination running wild, fueled by the eerie setting and the isolation. But the instincts I'd learned to trust in the wild screamed otherwise. Something was here, something watching, waiting in the depths of the Whispering Woods. I gathered my belongings, my hands trembling slightly, and prepared to leave the clearing behind. But even as I turned back toward the trail, the whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. The forest seemed to close in around me with every step, the trees stretching taller and the underbrush thickening as if to trap me within their grasp. The fading light no longer offered comfort, instead, it cast grotesque shadows that danced and twisted like living things. Each rustle set my nerves on edge, each whisper a thread pulling me deeper into a web I couldn't see. I forced myself to keep moving, guided only by the faint glow of the dying sun filtering through the canopy. By the time I reached the edge of the woods, darkness had fully claimed the sky. The once inviting path now felt like a gauntlet, lined with unseen eyes and silent watchers. I glanced back once, catching a glimpse of a shadow slipping between the trees, too swift to identify, but undeniably human in shape. My breath caught in my throat as the whispers crescendoed into a low, murmuring chorus that seemed to echo from the very earth beneath my feet. That night, back in the safety of my tent miles away from the whispering woods, sleep was elusive. The memory of those whispers haunted me, their eerie cadence replaying in my mind like a ghostly lullaby. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive with something ancient and watchful, something that had noticed my intrusion and was marking me in its own inscrutable way. I realized then that the wilderness was not merely a backdrop for adventure or solitude. It was a realm of secrets and shadows, where the line between the natural and the supernatural blurred. The whispering woods had welcomed me, but its welcome was not without a price. Somewhere deep within those towering pines and tangled underbrush, something waited, silent, patient, and unseen. And I knew, without a doubt, that the forest was far from empty. The next time I returned to the whispering woods, the memory of that first unsettling visit clung to me like a shadow. Despite the unease that gnawed at the edges of my mind, curiosity pushed me back into the depths of that ancient forest. I needed to understand what I had encountered, to face whatever it was that had watched me so intently. This time, I wasn't alone. I set up camp near a small, hidden clearing I had discovered before, hoping to stay the night and gather more clues. The sun was low when I arrived, the forest bathed once again in that fading golden light that transformed the woods into a cathedral of towering trunks and whispering leaves. The air was cooler now, the stillness heavier. I unpacked my gear and began to prepare my campsite, thankful for the firewood I'd gathered along the trail. As twilight approached, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine, symbols carved deep into the bark of several nearby tree trunks. They weren't the simple initials or random marks left by careless hikers. These were deliberate, intricate patterns, etched with a precision that suggested purpose and meaning. Some resembled spirals, others interlocking lines that formed shapes both familiar and unknowable. The carvings were weathered but fresh enough to be unsettling, as if someone had been here recently, marking the forest with warnings or invocations I couldn't decipher. I ran my fingers along the rough wood, feeling the grooves of the symbols beneath my touch. My mind raced with questions. Who had carved these? What did they mean? Were they a sign of the forest's darker nature, or a message left by those who had come before me? The atmosphere thickened with tension, the forest seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, as if the trees themselves were watching. As night fell and the fire flickered to life, I settled near the glow, hoping the warmth would keep the growing dread at bay. But the woods had other plans. The whispers returned, louder now, weaving through the trees like a soft chant just beyond comprehension. Every so often, a branch snapped, or a shadow flickered at the edge of my vision. I told myself it was nerves, the strain of isolation getting to me, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Then, I saw it, first just a glimpse, a dark figure slipping silently between the pines. It wasn't a deer or any woodland creature I knew, the shape was too tall, too human. It moved with a predatory grace, blending seamlessly with the night, always just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. I froze, heart pounding, as the figure vanished behind a cluster of trees. The feeling of being watched intensified, an oppressive presence pressing down from the shadows. I tried to dismiss the fear, telling myself it was a trick of the light or my imagination playing cruel games. But every time I looked up, there it was again, just a shadow, a silhouette, always keeping its distance but never truly gone. It was stalking me, moving silently and deliberately, as if it had been waiting for me to return. The night stretched on, punctuated by chilling sounds that seemed to emanate from all directions. Low, guttural murmurs echoed through the underbrush, punctuated by the occasional snap of twigs and rustle of leaves. I couldn't tell if the noises were natural or something else entirely. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams that only added to the disorienting atmosphere. The fire's warmth felt fragile against the encroaching cold darkness. At one point, I caught a faint glimpse of the figure standing just beyond the clearing, its outline barely distinguishable against the night sky. It was tall and slender, but its posture was unnatural, almost predatory. I raised my flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness, but the figure melted away before the light could touch it. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a whisper that sounded like a warning, an unintelligible phrase carried in a voice both ancient and hollow. Fear tightened its grip around my chest. I realized then that this presence was not accidental, it was aware of me, watching every move, waiting for the right moment. The forest was no longer just a place of solitude and beauty, it was a hunting ground, and I was the prey. I tried to steady my breath, reminding myself that I was not alone. I spoke aloud, hoping to break the silence, to coax whatever was out of hiding. But the only reply was the rustling of leaves and a faint, mocking laugh that seemed to swirl around me like a cold wind. The fire flickered again, and I felt a sharp prickling sensation crawling up my spine. The symbols on the trees suddenly took on a new significance. They were not just carvings, they were markers, boundaries set by whoever or whatever inhabited this place. I had crossed into a territory fiercely guarded by a presence that thrived on fear and silence. The figure was no mere shadow, it was a sentinel, a stalker bound to these woods by some ancient force. As the hours stretched into the deep night, the tension became unbearable. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind, set my nerves alight. I found myself scanning the trees endlessly, trying to anticipate the figure's next move. But it remained elusive, always just a step ahead, slipping through the darkness with an eerie grace. It was a game of cat and mouse, and I was losing. At one point, I caught a fleeting reflection in the dark surface of my water bottle, a pale face, gaunt and expressionless, staring intently from the shadows. I spun around, flashlight raised, but found nothing. The woods were silent again, but the memory of that face lingered like a ghost. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me, feeling more vulnerable than ever before. Sleep was impossible. I sat by the fire, eyes wide, heart hammering, listening to the forest breathe around me. The figure's presence was a constant weight, a reminder that the woods were alive with something beyond human comprehension. I realized that this dark watcher was not merely observing, it was studying me, learning my patterns, waiting for its moment to strike. As dawn approached, the whispers faded, and the forest seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped it all night. The figure disappeared into the light, leaving only the carved symbols and the lingering sense of dread. I packed my things quickly, eager to leave the clearing and the haunting presence behind. Walking back through the thinning trees, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that shadowy stalker following silently just beyond the path. The forest was quiet now, but the marks it had left on me were permanent. The whispering woods held secrets far darker than I had imagined, secrets carved into the bark, whispered in the wind, and guarded by a shadow that prowled beneath the pines. That night taught me that some forests are not just places to explore but realms to be feared. The shadow in the pines was no figment of imagination, it was real, deliberate, and waiting. And I knew that if I ever returned, it would be ready to greet me again, silent and patient, stalking just beyond the firelight. After my unnerving solo encounters in the whispering woods, I thought a group camping trip might offer some comfort, a shared experience to dispel the lingering fears that had taken root in my mind. So, when friends invited me to join them at Blackwood Hollow, a forest clearing notorious among locals for its eerie reputation, I agreed, hoping the camaraderie and laughter would drown out the shadows I'd come to dread. Our arrival was met with clear skies and the warm glow of late afternoon sun filtering through the canopy. Blackwood Hollow was deceptively beautiful, a serene pocket of the forest framed by ancient trees, their roots twisting over mossy rocks. We set up our tents near the edge of a placid pond, the water reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. The initial mood was lighthearted, we joked, shared stories, and fished along the banks, the sense of normalcy a balm after my previous solitary nights. As darkness crept in, the atmosphere subtly shifted. The laughter quieted, replaced by an uneasy silence that seemed to stretch between the trees. The forest, which had felt inviting and peaceful, now pressed in on us with an almost tangible weight. It started with the faintest noises, soft rustling in the underbrush, a barely perceptible whisper carried on the breeze. At first, we dismissed these sounds as the usual woodland creatures settling in for the night, but there was something off about them, something deliberate and unnerving. Then, strange things began to happen. Our fishing poles, carefully leaned against a tree moments before, vanished without a trace. We searched the immediate area, calling out and shaking branches, but there was no sign of them. The air grew colder, and an oppressive silence descended, broken only by the occasional snap of twigs that seemed too deliberate to be random. Shadows flickered unnaturally among the trees, shifting and darting just beyond our field of vision. Tension mounted as the night deepened. One of our friends, Mark, volunteered to collect firewood from the surrounding forest. We watched him disappear into the dark thicket, flashlights bobbing in the distance. Minutes passed, then more, his absence stretching beyond what felt reasonable. We called his name, our voices echoing through the hollow, but there was no reply, only the unsettling quiet of the woods. Panic began to ripple through our group. We split up briefly to search, the beam of our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we called for Mark. The forest seemed to close in around us, each step heavier than the last. Then, near a cluster of twisted pines, we found signs of his last moments, broken branches, a discarded glove, and footprints trailing off into the shadows. But Mark himself was nowhere to be found. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Fear gripped us all. The warmth and laughter that had marked the day gave way to dread and desperation. We huddled together, reluctant to stray far from the firelight as the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, threading through the trees like a warning. The shadows around us flickered and danced, shapes forming and dissolving too quickly to grasp. We were no longer visitors, we were intruders in a place fiercely guarded by unseen forces. Our attempts to find a way out only deepened the nightmare. Every path we tried seemed to loop back on itself, the forest twisting and rearranging as if it were alive and determined to keep us trapped. The familiar landmarks we had noted earlier were gone, replaced by a maze of gnarled roots and towering trunks that blocked our way. The sense of being hunted grew with each passing moment, a silent predator stalking us through the darkness. As the night wore on, exhaustion battled with fear. Our voices grew hoarse from calling Mark's name, and our movements slowed under the weight of panic. We shared nervous glances, each silently questioning how this once beautiful clearing had turned into a landscape of terror. The unknown presence that haunted Blackwood Hollow seemed to feed on our despair, its malevolent force palpable in the cold air. In the early hours before dawn, a faint glimmer caught my eye, a flicker of movement near the edge of the clearing. We followed cautiously, hearts pounding, and found marks etched into the bark of a tree. The symbols resembled those I had seen carved in the Whispering Woods, their meaning as cryptic as ever but undeniably tied to the darkness enveloping this place. It was a message, a boundary, or perhaps a curse. The realization hit us hard. Whatever had taken Mark was not a random predator but something ancient and deliberate, bound to these woods by forces beyond our understanding. The forest's beauty was a mask, hiding a sinister secret that preyed on those foolish enough to enter its grasp. Our friend was gone, swallowed by the malevolence lurking just beyond the firelight. With the first light of dawn breaking through the trees, we made a desperate decision to leave Blackwood Hollow behind. We moved swiftly, guided by the faintest glimmers of daylight and the fading echoes of the forest's whispers. The path back was still treacherous, but the oppressive weight lifted slightly with the sun's arrival. That night, surrounded by friends but feeling more isolated than ever, I understood how quickly joy could turn to terror in the heart of the wilderness. The forest's embrace was not always gentle, and sometimes, the shadows it held were hungry for more than just silence. Months later, seeking a change of scenery and some respite from the haunting memories of Blackwood Hollow, my family and I planned a weekend retreat to a remote campsite near Silver Creek. Nestled in a secluded woodland, the spot promised a serene escape, gentle water flowing over smooth stones, vibrant foliage painting the landscape with bursts of color, and the soft hum of nature undisturbed by human hands. We arrived in the late morning, the sun casting a warm glow over the creek's sparkling surface. The air was crisp and fragrant with pine and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the oppressive forests I'd encountered before. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that this place would be different, safer. The family set about pitching tents and gathering firewood, laughter filling the clearing as the kids explored the nearby banks. But as the day wore on, an uneasy feeling began to creep in, subtle yet persistent. While wandering along the creek, I stumbled across an abandoned campsite hidden beneath a thicket of trees. At first glance, it looked long forgotten, ashes cold and scattered, a few rusted cans, and weathered remnants of what had once been a fire pit. But something about it unsettled me. The ground bore signs of a hurried departure, overturned rocks, broken branches, and a strange scattering of symbols carved into nearby stones and tree bark. I knelt to examine one of the carvings, a series of jagged lines and arcs that resembled nothing I'd seen before, yet somehow felt familiar. It was the same kind of cryptic marking I'd encountered in the Whispering Woods and Blackwood Hollow, a silent language etched into the landscape by unknown hands. The realization settled heavily on me. This place, too, bore the scars of something dark and ancient. As night fell, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The comforting chorus of crickets and frogs quieted, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against us from the shadows. The forest seemed to close in, its vibrant colors muted under the cold moonlight. Strange occurrences began almost immediately. Odd markings appeared overnight on rocks near our campsite, freshly scratched cymbals glowing faintly in the firelight. Whispered voices echoed just beyond the tree-line, their source impossible to pinpoint. And, on occasion, a pale figure seemed to watch from the darkness, its presence fleeting yet unmistakable. The family felt the weight of an unseen presence growing heavier with each passing hour. Sleep became a distant memory as fear gnawed at our minds. Footsteps circled our tents in the dead of night, soft and deliberate, never approaching but always near. Shadows flickered unnaturally, shifting shapes that defied the logic of firelight and imagination. The children huddled close, their eyes wide with terror, sensing the malevolence that lurked just beyond. I tried to reassure them, to steel myself against the creeping dread, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Every rustle in the brush, every whisper on the wind, set my nerves alight. I kept a flashlight close, shining its beam into the darkness whenever the silence became too thick, but the shadows only seemed to recoil and gather elsewhere. One night, as the wind whispered through the trees, I caught sight of the pale figure again, standing motionless between two towering oaks, its form barely distinguishable from the mist. It watched with hollow eyes that reflected the firelight, its presence chilling and utterly devoid of warmth. I blinked and it was gone, leaving only the cold air and the echo of its silent gaze. The family's fear escalated to terror. We packed hastily at first light, desperate to escape the invisible grip that held us hostage. The natural beauty that had drawn us here was now a cruel mask, hiding a darkness that thrived in the quiet and the shadows. As we left Silver Creek behind, I felt a lingering chill, a reminder that some places in the wild are never truly safe. This retreat underscored a grim truth: danger in the wilderness isn't always cloaked in dense forests or towering pines. Sometimes, it hides beneath the tranquil surface of a creek, in the subtle markings on a rock, or in the pale gaze of a figure that watches silently from the shadows. The woods are deceptive, their beauty a fragile veil over ancient horrors that wait patiently, hungry for those who dare to enter their domain. Looking back on the chilling encounters I've had across these haunted woodlands, a pattern emerges, one that binds the Whispering Woods, Blackwood Hollow, and the forests near Silver Creek in a sinister tapestry of fear and disappearance. Each place, though miles apart and distinct in appearance, shares haunting commonalities that refuse to be ignored. In every instance, there were symbols, carvings etched into tree bark or scratched onto stones, cryptic signs that seemed to mark territories or warn trespassers. These markings were never random, they carried a weight, as if charged with ancient intent, guiding or guarding some dark presence that dwelled within the forest's depths. Their repetition across different locations suggests a language of dread, a silent communication between forces that transcend human understanding. Then there are the stalking figures, shadows that slip through the trees with unnatural grace, watching, waiting, always just beyond the reach of sight. These entities were not mere animals nor the product of nervous imagination. Their deliberate movements, the way they vanished when confronted, and the palpable sense of menace they exuded point to something far older and more malevolent than any ordinary predator. They seem to feed on fear itself, thriving in the silence between heartbeats, stalking victims with a patience born from centuries of lurking unseen. The victims themselves, whether solitary hikers, groups of friends, or families, share a grim fate. The disappearances were sudden, leaving behind only signs of struggle or abandonment, scattered belongings, broken branches, faint footprints fading into shadow. None of those taken left a trace beyond these cryptic clues, swallowed by the forest as if it had claimed them for its own. It's a chilling reminder that these woods do not merely shelter life, they also harbor death, and perhaps something that defies death entirely. What binds all these experiences is a deep, unsettling truth: the wilderness is never truly empty. Beneath its beauty and tranquility lies a darkness that predates human memory, ancient forces that have remained hidden, watching as we intrude into their realm. The forests are alive not just with animals and trees but with secrets and horrors that prey on human vulnerability. They blur the lines between the natural and supernatural, turning what should be an escape into a nightmare. Reflecting on these experiences, I am struck by how fragile the boundary between adventure and terror truly is. What begins as a quest for solitude or connection with nature can quickly spiral into a confrontation with forces beyond comprehension. The woods that call to us with their mystery and allure can just as easily become prisons, their shadows harboring threats that wait patiently for the unwary. These encounters have taught me to approach the wilderness with a new respect, tempered by caution and an awareness of the unknown. The forests do not owe us their secrets, and sometimes, the price of discovery is far greater than anticipated. The stories of those lost, the whispers carried on the wind, and the shadows that slip between the trees are warnings etched into the very fabric of the wild. There remains a part of me that wonders what lies beyond what we can see, the ancient forces that shape these haunted places, the entities that stalk the night, and the fate of those vanished without a trace. The wilderness is a realm of beauty and terror intertwined, a place where human courage meets primal fear. And while I have walked its paths and felt its chill, I know the story is far from over. The woods still whisper, still watch, still wait. And somewhere deep within their shadows, the line between this world and something darker blurs, reminding me that in the heart of the wilderness, adventure is never far from nightmare.